Rainier Valley Historical Society's mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and interpret the history and heritage of Rainier Valley and its people, and to promote public involvement in and appreciation of its history and culture. Our geographic boundaries are from Dearborn Street to the city limits and from I-5 to Lake Washington. Our office is located at 3710 South Ferdinand Street in the Columbia City neighborhood of Seattle.
Okay, this is Judy Bentley and Buzz Anderson on November 21st, 1995. We're at the Southeast Seattle Senior Center, and we're interviewing Vanecia Adderson. What was Hillman like as a community?
Well, all I know is that there aren't the business people there that used to be in Hillman or Columbia. It seems like they're practically all gone because I remember the old timers that were there. And the old streetcar line. I went to school on the streetcar. We used to, the transportation cost 5 cents a day, got 2 tokens for a nickel. 25 cents a day for lunch.
At the school?
Yeah. Because I couldn't walk home, I was too far to do that, so I traveled by streetcar.
Were there lots of other children on the streetcar? Or?
Oh, yes.
And what were the school lunches like? Do you remember them?
Not really.
What?
I just remember at Whitmer School when I was there that they had candy.
Oh, really?
And the green striped candy sticks that I just loved. And I remember that to this day.
Was that on special occasions, or how did you get
No, I
candy?
think they had it, I think, most of the time. But of course, back in those days, it was so cheap. And you could afford it. I know a friend and I used to sing duets together. And when our families had company, they would ask us to sing for them and they'd give us money. And if we would get 50 cents or more, that was a lot of money in those days. And we would dash down to Croxton's grocery and buy candy.
Spend the whole 50 cents on candy?
Yes.
And
We got a lot of it then at that time.
Where was Croxton's grocery store?
Croxton. It was on, let's see, about 46 and Ferdinand, I guess.
Yeah, 46 for now.
Did you take the streetcar other places?
No, but just to Franklin, and then when my mother would take me into Seattle when she was going shopping. And then to go out to Renton, we would stop at the city limits and then go back and collect another dime. So it was 10 cents out there and then 20 cents to go to Renton.
What were you going to Renton for?
Well, I had friends there, meet people.
So let's talk about your schooling. Then you've mentioned getting there by streetcar and the lunches and the candy. What are your earliest memories of school, of the classroom?
Well, I don't know how to answer that really.
Did you like your teachers?
Yeah, pretty well. And I remember once in a while we would skip study hall and walk down to the lake.
Was this in high school or
Mhm.
earlier? And what would you do at the lake?
Just go down there and enjoy it,
Mhm.
being on the beach, and then get back in time for the next class.
What high school was this?
Franklin.
Went to Franklin. Do you remember any of the teachers there?
Yes, I do. I think, I'm sure they're all gone at this point. But Sidney Trappen was the vice principal. Mr. Reed was the principal for so many years. And we always remember him as when he would be up on the stage, he would stand there and he had a habit of taking a hold of the seam of his pants and pulling it up and dropping it. That was one thing we always remembered about him. He was nice.
So when did you graduate from Franklin?
1931.
And what did you do after high school?
Well, that was during the Depression, so there wasn't much doing. Then I married in 35. But I didn't have jobs. The only place where I ever worked was hit fireworks.
Oh, really?
And well, their daughter, their youngest daughter, was a very close friend of mine and still is. And so I used to go up and work in the factory. And I remember I made these Niagara Falls, they called them, where you press something on them, you have a filling in them, and then press something on them and get them the right thickness. And I broke the record of making a number of those during the day, I guess it was. And then when the 4th arrived, I would work in the office for a while, and then I would work out on the tables helping them sell fireworks.
Where did they sell the fireworks? Right
there. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was in Columbia City, there, if you know where their factory was. I've heard about it. Mm-hmm.
They had a bunch of small buildings up there, wasn't
Uh-huh.
it? You worked in.
Yeah,
one of
because
those.
I was in one of these when I was making those fiery Niagaras, I think they called them. I was in a certain building. So,
They had a couple of explosions up there. Were you there when that happened? Any of them?
not there, not working there, but there were false rumors going around about that too. That was too bad.
False rumors that
About what had happened and how it had happened, and they just were making into a good story, but it wasn't true.
what was true? Did you know?
I don't really know exactly how it happened, but there was I was up in Hillman, and a fellow who delivered bread to the stores came in there, and thought he just really had a story and was talking about a very bad way that it happened to this girl there, and then I found out afterwards it was not true.
When she was, the one person was killed. in the explosion.
But they were saying that her head was blown off. He looked down and there, telling terrible things like that, and it was not true.
So how long did you work?
Oh, just during the 4th time.
Just
So
their
that
peak
was
season, I assume.
That was some total of my working until I used to do some for my husband for free.
Mhm. So what can you talk more about the Depression period? What was life like?
Well, I
during
just didn't have anything. I didn't have money. I just was used to it. That was my way of life, and I didn't miss it because I never had it, because we were not well-to-do by any means. And so it was just my way of life. I didn't really have things until after
What did young people do for fun or?
Well, I used to play ball out in the street and down in the parks.
Uh-huh.
I
Which place? Where did you play ball?
out in the streets because there wasn't the traffic then, and we would play baseball out there, and I played down at the Columbia Playfield. And we had a little tiny place there that it was in place of what they have field houses now. This was just a tiny room, and we would earn letters, but we did our own. They brought the felt, and we would cut them and sew them. Make it all.
This was for Franklin? You were making
No,
Fs?
this was for the Columbia Playfield.
Okay.
They had their own league there.
Yeah, and I played on a girls' team there, wore those nice boomers, you know. And then when we went to play a team up in Seattle, we had to go by streetcar, and we wore those boomers up to that school to play them.
Baseball?
Pardon? Baseball. Uh-huh.
Not softball?
Well, not the hard baseballs, no.
Softball.
But, yeah.
Oh, we call it softball.
Speaking of the hard, of the indoor, about that big,
Yeah.
that is true.
But I remember too that when after I'd left Whitworth and go down to the games because I was very sports minded and liked to play sports and everything. I'd go down there and there wouldn't be anybody yelling for the team, so I did. And I got people and got what do you call them? Yelling the different.
Yell leaders.
Yeah, well, making up or whatever the calls were then that you to encourage the players.
Yells.
And so I used to do that, so they'd have somebody supporting them.
Were there many girls' teams then? Was that so? It was unusual to
Yeah, I
be
guess
doing
so,
that.
because that's the only one I know that I was on.
So you played a Seattle team. Any other teams?
I
in the
don't
area?
remember how many there were, but I know that we did go into Seattle sometimes to play other teams.
These were teams that were in other playfields,
Uh-huh.
between the playfields.
So what was your position in baseball?
Well, I used to play second base or shortstop.
So you moved pretty quickly.
What was your batting average?
We never figured that out. And I didn't care. I just liked to play.
Were there girls' sports teams at Franklin?
Well, yes, there were, but I wasn't on those. It required staying after school on that extracurricular things, and I didn't do that. It just wasn't convenient for me to come home on the streetcar as soon as school was out. We didn't have cars.
Did anyone own cars around you, or were they pretty rare?
There weren't a lot of them, and the children didn't have cars in those days. Of course, like they do now, everyone has them. But in those days, they just didn't have cars. And I remember there were a bunch of us out in my area, in the Hillman area, that used to get together, not in couples or anything. It would just be boys and girls. And we would decide to go to collect money. And then one person would get a car and would buy a gallon of gas. And then they would drive into this Bigman's pie factory. And they would buy we'd buy pies with whatever we could muster up and a gallon of gas to get us there and back. Then we'd come back to my house and my mother would make coffee. And so that was quite a treat.
How much was gas then?
Oh, probably a dime or so, I don't know.
I got your place now.
Yeah, we didn't have money.
What were your favorite subjects in school?
Oh, I guess English. I wasn't too fond of mathematics, but I did like that. And gym.
What did you do in gym besides, did they do baseball in gym or was it something, other activity?
Well, I had gym every day, and another girl and I kind of caused some problems. We were picking, that's an awful thing to say, but picking on one of the girls there, and the gym teacher changed us. Shaw was her name. And so to other 2 days, but then she found out that we were coming 5 days. So
it didn't work.
Yeah. But,
Do you remember why you were picking on her? Because something girls did.
yeah, I guess.
They didn't have any reason.
I shouldn't have said that.
How did you get into flying? When did you decide
Oh, well,
to do
that happened much later after I
Uh-huh.
was married. My husband had always wanted to fly, but I didn't know that. He never said anything about it to me. And so one Sunday, we were going for a drive, and he had prearranged something that I didn't know about, and wound up down at the Renton Airport and introduced me to this fellow there that had an operation. And he asked me if I wanted to go flying, and I said no. So one thing led to another, kept talking, and then he said, well, we can just go up, and if you don't like it, bring you right back down. So he put me on the right side, and he sat on the left, and Gordon sat in the back. And so we went up flying, and then he let me take the wheel, and I just got interested. It really just seemed like an exciting thing. So by the time we came down, I just thought it was great. So my husband and I both started taking lessons at the same time. And I soloed in a conventional gear. And then we bought a Cessna 172, and I soloed in that. And then later we turned that in for a 182, and I had that until just recently.
Oh, really?
So I just flew for fun.
Did you fly just locally, or how far did you go?
Well, no, I've flown to California, and another lady and I flew down there to see the beginning of a powder puff derby. I belong to the 99s, which is women pilots. And we flew down there to Torrance, just way back down in the south part. And we were gone a week. And, after the race was over, we flew up to the San Francisco area and visited friends of mine. And we always go to the nut tree when we go in that area. And so we were gone a week, and it was fun. And then another time, I took another friend in 99, and we flew to San Francisco for a convention. And we were gone over a week for that, too.
Do you know where that name comes from? The 99?
What?
99?
Oh, yes. Amelia Earhart started it, and she had thought that we should have some kind of an organization for women pilots. And so she talked to some other women pilots, and they got thinking about it, and they found out who all of the women pilots were in the United States, and there happened to be 117 at that time. So they contacted them all and invited them to a meeting in New York, and the New York area. And so they met, and maybe more than once. But by the time that they wound up, Amelia thought that they should name it after the number of charter members. So it finally got up to 99 members. And so that's where that name came from. And she was our first president. I never had the privilege of knowing her. I would like to have. But we have lots and lots of pilots. Now the 99s have around 7,000.
Is that right?
And that's all over the world. We have an international convention every year. And about every maybe 7 years or so we go out of the country. But most of them are here and sort of changing in locations to accommodate everybody. And then in the United States, we're broken down to sections. And I'm in the Northwest section, which is 8 states, including Alaska. And so the International has a convention every year. And then our section has a convention every year. So I always go to both of those. The last international one was in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
So you were flying until just a few years ago?
Yeah, I'm not flying now, but I consider myself still a pilot because I still a life member of the 99s and I belong to the Washington Pilots Association, which I'm going to their meeting tonight. And I'm always concerned with aviation groups.
You ever have any close calls when you're flying?
I just had one, but it wasn't bad. I only remember one time I was always looking for an excuse to fly, and this friend who had this operation in Renton there sometimes would give me an errand just because he knew I liked to fly. So this one time he asked me to deliver something for him down to Portland. And I started down there, and around Toledo is a real bad spot for flying. And so when I got down there, all of a sudden, I was in it, in the weather. And I was glad it happened, really, because I found out that I don't panic. And so here I was, I had to make a 180 and turn around to return home, and I was going down. Well, I knew what to do, and I corrected that. Got into level flight and went back to Renton. And I was just fine. And then when I got back and landed and pulled up, then I sat there and shook. So it was good to know that I wouldn't panic. But that was really the only real instance I can think of. And that was such a sudden thing. Oh, I didn't mention, too, that when I started taking lessons out in Renton, that was when I found out that a neighbor of mine that I grew up with up by Whitworth School was my instructor. And I didn't even know he was there. And he was a part owner of this operation. And we thought that was pretty interesting. He sort of got a kick out of teaching me. And I remember one time we were flying, and I'd be sitting there, and I'd be sitting up straight, and the airplane would be moving, leaning, or something, and I would just sit up there. He gave me a poke. He says, "Get over there," and I've never forgotten that. That was really interesting. Of course, that doesn't mean anything to you people because you don't really know what that is, but you're supposed to go with the airplane. And here I was trying to stay up straight, and the airplane was turning and leaning, and but that really taught me anyway. But we thought that was interesting that he was the one who was my main instructor.
What was his name?
Spiro Adams.
At the time you learned to fly, was it quite unusual for a woman to learn?
Yes,
What year was it?
We had a rough time because the men don't think the women should fly. In fact, we still buck that, but however, the women have made great strides. We have a lot of women captains now, and they're really getting into the flying. And a lot of during the war, a lot of the women in our 99s did a lot of ferrying of airplanes across the seas and all over the United States. They did an awful lot to help out on that. But the men still wouldn't admit that they were doing anything good or right.
They weren't allowed to be in combat, but they could do the ferry, deliver a plane to a base or something.
All over, even across the seas, and as well as all over the United States. But they have gotten into combat since. They're making great strides now. But I never went in for anything like that. But I just flew for fun.
Were your children proud of you that you could fly an airplane? Because probably no one else's mother could.
Well, yes, my daughter, in fact, at one time got her license, but then she got away from it. And my son, my husband would, when you take him with him, would have him fly and was kind of teaching him in a way. But he couldn't afford to keep it up. And it wasn't as bad back in those days, but now it's terribly expensive. And in fact, I could have become a helicopter pilot, only I got to thinking I wouldn't ever be able to buy one. And in order to you have to keep flying it to keep current. So I decided against it. And now I wish I had, really. But
What was that opportunity?
well, a friend of mine had helicopters, and she taught that, and I could have learned from her. But then, as I say, it's the same thing as upgrading. I'm a private pilot, and I didn't really have any interest to go on and become a commercial pilot because I had no desire to fly for money and charge, and I had no desire to do that. And I don't think that because you have that rating, it makes you a better pilot. You have to keep flying and practicing to keep current. So I never missed it. I started studying it for one time, but I never went through with it.
Did your husband keep on flying when you did?
He flew for quite a while, but he flew for business. And when he would fly other states and different places to go to mines and things like that, so many times he would be socked in with weather. Well, then it meant that he had to leave the airplane and come home commercial, and then go back another time to pick it up. And so he got a little tired of that. So he quit flying. And then, of course, the FAA requires so many things that you do, and some of it's unnecessary, actually. And they're always saying you have to do this and you have to do that. And so he sort of became disenchanted and quit flying, but I kept on. He wanted to sell the airplane, and I kind of rebelled.
Did you keep your plane at the Renton Airfield?
Uh-huh.
Where were you living about that time?
Where I'm living now in Lake Ridge. I can remember when Lake Ridge was nothing but two little houses. I never knew I'd be living there someday.
How many girls from Franklin High School learned to fly?
I don't know that.
Got any estimate?
No, I haven't heard any
most of your flying in Boeing's.
No, Renton.
Renton, yeah, that's right. Didn't fly on that little airport. Total tours. South of there, South Prairie.
Oh, no, well, I've flown in there because I knew a lady who lived there at one time. One of our 99s lived there, and we flew in there for maybe a couple times. And then the evergreen one, I think it's called, it's a grass strip up by Enumclaw.
Fly in it. Bellevue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they took that away from us, like Sandpoint.
So it became harder and harder to find an airfield too.
Well, there was so much, I don't know, people against airports, and yet we now say if they took away the airplanes and you couldn't fly anywhere, how would they like that? They'd have to go back to driving. And they just seem to, they don't understand, I guess, because they're still trying to take away some of the privileges at Boeing Field right now at this time, and they tried at CCAC and didn't get anywhere, but they're trying at Boeing now. But they took Sandpoint away from us, and that was absolutely unnecessary because the pattern was all out over the water, and which would be safe, and it was large enough actually that they could have used both. They could have used it for a park and an airport actually, but of course Senator Magnuson was the one who was behind that, and they really took that away from us, and that's too bad because we need more, not to have them taken away from us.
Did you ever fly into the emergency airport in Galway, Pat?
No.
Well, I'd like to have heard about that.
Any other questions about flying?
What about Lakewood? When you moved out to Lakewood, when did you move in, buy a place out there? Did you build or did you buy a
We
place?
built our
You built
house in 46, 47. And we moved in the last day of March of 47.
And there were very few homes at that time.
Yeah, there weren't a lot then. A lot of empty lots. But it's all filled now.
Well, you had a transportation problem then, unless you had a car.
Well, we have
Yeah.
a car there. And there are no sidewalks in Lake Ridge, so it isn't a place to go walking.
Were the roads laid out at that time when you built out there? Did they put in many
Yeah,
of those
pretty
roads?
much, but the roads there do not go north, south, east, and west. They wind. And I know, like in the summertime years ago when we used to be out working in our yard, there was always somebody stopping and coming and asking us where is this and where to find a house or something, because the roads would just wind around. And it's easy for us, but for the people that don't know it, to try to find a house, it's really difficult.
This was right after the war. Was a time when a lot of housing construction was going on. Was that a factor in your moving there at that point?
No, it was just because we were looking for a place. We had always rented because we had moved a lot. And then we were looking over in Mercer Island and saw some property we liked there pretty well. And then we found out things about it that weren't so good. So then we happened to see this. It's 2 lots. And we happened to find that, and we bought that and then built.
Did it grow up fairly quickly after that?
Well, not quickly, but it was a steady process.
Did you see many changes in Seattle during World War II? Were you here for that whole period?
Oh, yes.
Did the city change and are a lot of people coming in?
Well, yes, I guess that did happen. But, of course, we always, Seattle, when anybody says Seattle, all they talk about is rain. And so we've gotten to the point where we figure, okay, don't come, it's going to rain. Because we don't need to have more people. But it has steadily grown.
Did you get a sense of the city growing of too many people coming at some point?
Well, it didn't really bother me too much. I didn't really think about that.
Good stuff. Now, I want to ask, I'm interested in hearing about some of the organizations for girls and women that you belonged to growing up. You've mentioned Rainbow Girls, but just start from the first ones that you remember.
Well, I was a charter member of ARC Assembly number 23 in Congress City. And I guess the main things I did there, I was always in the choir or the organist. Because music has always been important to me, music and dancing.
How did this get started? Why was there such an organization? What were women wanting to do?
Well, it was, I don't remember just who the women were, but there were some who came to start this. They thought that there were enough girls in the area to start an organization, and so we were contacted, the ones of us that they knew about, to see if we were interested. And there were enough to start a chapter of Rainbow Girls there in Columbia. So we became charter members of that.
This was part of the ARC Lodge. and
The ARC
Masons,
Assembly
and,
number 23.
This was a division of that for the youth.
But I was always sorry I couldn't continue in it because I didn't have, they have a Mason in the family too, going to be an Eastern Star member, and I could not.
And to have a Mason in the family had to be your father or an uncle or a brother or someone.
Yes, So
Where were the meetings and how often did you meet?
we met there in the temple, and we had dinners and different things that were going on in this building. And I don't remember just how often we met, whether it was more than once a month. It may have been.
Did you meet girls there that you didn't know otherwise, or were
Yes, but most of them I did know.
What else you mentioned baseball earlier. What else did girls do for activities?
Well, let's see, I belonged to a group called the Seattle Choral Club in Seattle, and I was belonged to that for probably 6 or 7 years, and we met once a week down in the YMCA building, and then we put on 2 concerts a year, spring and fall, and we memorized about 12 pieces for each one, and we performed in different areas. And I always enjoyed that because I loved the singing and harmonizing. I was an alto, and I always enjoyed that.
You mentioned something about this was a citywide organization, but it was hard to get the group to come to the South End.
Well, sometimes they would meet in some other place or for maybe a social function or something, and we never get them to come to the South End because they thought that was so foreign. They had to have everything in the North End. So we just gave in to them.
So you met in the
And,
North End most of the time?
Well, we met down at the YMCA for our rehearsals. But if they would have any social functions, sometimes he would go to other places, but he would come to the south. And I was in a trio in high school. We sang for different areas. We were in the vaudevilles and the programs at high school. And then also when people got to hear about us, we were asked to sing for different organizations and sang for businessmen's clubs and different things. And I always remember one incident there where we sang for the businessmen's club that met down at Surrey Park. And in our naive way, this one number that we sang was called Turn on the Heat. And we didn't realize what the implication there was, but anyway, it caused a little stir. And but we were the first trio to sing over radio in Seattle.
Oh,
And this one time we got a job with KOL Carnival Hour for a month, and we sang with them, and we Lord Ireland was the master of ceremonies, and right now the name of the pianist escapes me, but he was very well known, and they used to spoil us because we were the only girls, and the fellows, they were all men, the other people and the orchestra that they had there. They used to bring us candy and flowers, and we really enjoyed that. They really spoiled us. So we used to go in by streetcar and go home by streetcar at night, but we enjoyed that very much. But we were proud to say that we were the first trio to sing over radio in Seattle.
what year approximately was that? What era was that?
Well, it would have been probably around 30. It would have been before 31. So it's probably 29 or 30, something like that. And,
You were still in high school at that time then?
yes, because we did perform at the high school in their programs. We enjoyed that very much.
What radio station was that?
KOL.
Where were their studios then? Where did you have to go?
Studio?
Downtown, the studio.
The radio station.
Radio.
Oh, the radio, well,
Or station studio.
right downtown Seattle. I don't remember the exact location. But we enjoyed that very much.
Did you feel fairly safe traveling by streetcar? Was that something
Yes,
young
but
women
there
did?
wasn't that problem back in those days, really. Because I know I would, like if I would go to a girlfriend's house at night, back then they have the curfew, 10 o'clock curfew, street lights. And I know every time I'd be out there where the curfew would be on, I'd feel so guilty and run home.
The street lights would go off at 10?
They would blink.
Oh.
And
I never heard that before.
yeah.
For everyone? Was the curfew for
In all
everyone or for
in
you?
the areas. I don't know how big an area, but I know it did in our area. And so that was the cue that we should be home. And,
That was for everyone or for
Mhm.
young people?
well,
Everyone.
well, I suppose mostly for the young, but it blinked everywhere. So it. And then I have been very active for many, many years in community things. And out in Renton, I was on the steering committee that formed the YWCA there. And I've done many things like that. And I've been in the church choir since 1948 at the Episcopal Church in Renton. And then I also formed a choral club of my own with my friends and invited them to come, and we met I think we met every week for quite a while. And then after we got singing for a while, people heard
Involved with the Museum of Flight
yes,
at one point too?
I've been volunteering there ever since the beginning. And I'm still working there every Thursday all day long. I do things to help them, like helping with their mailings or anything that they need to be done. And then my biggest job is keeping track of all the volunteer hours for all of the volunteers. And I've made up calendars for the different departments, and then I take those around at the beginning of the year, or I make them all up at the beginning of the year. And then I take them around each month. Right after the last day of the month, I take, before the last day of the month, I take the calendars around to the areas so that they'll have them on the first. And then at the end of the month, right after the last day of the month, I collect all of these and then write this all up as to hours of each person, and then I put it on the computer. And we have put in between 6,000 and 7,000 hours a month. It's a little less now because of the Boeing strike, and so, but that's a lot of hours to be putting in. It helps the organization so much.
So you have quite a record of volunteer activities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have lots of volunteers. The docents are the ones who take the individuals or groups around the museum to explain everything to them. And that is quite a growing group.
Is there anything that, any topics that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about, particularly of Rainier Valley history?
I can't think of anything right off.
I would like to add that she's been a volunteer with the Historical Society for the last year, helping every week, usually, for helping with cataloging and stuff.
Well, I worked on the interviewing too. I got information on a few families for the organization too.
What families do you remember as being, when you were young here? Who were the leading families?
Well, Nick Bamcross and his wife Catherine, who had the confectionery down in Columbia City, they were old timers, and I got information for them. And then Menzel C. Laporte, who's handsome barber, well, you can't say stylist, but I used to go to him as a child, and I remember I'd go down and get a haircut, and he'd give me a shingle, and then I'd be freezing all the way home running up the hill.
A shingle cut, huh?
Yeah, it was a real short one, but we always thought he was such a handsome fellow. And then there were the Priestleys and the Hibs. A lot of the old time families, everybody's all gone mostly now. Ray Hitt is still alive. Well, and his sister, Marion, who's my very best friend. They're the only ones left of that family. And Ray's daughter. But they were a wonderful company, and they had such safe firecrackers, and they used to make set pieces, I remember how beautiful those were. And they really had safe fireworks, which you couldn't say about a lot of the other companies that came in after they did.
Did you go to fireworks displays
Oh,
too?
yes.
Do you remember
They
anything?
had them out at the university. We used to put them on out there, and they were just beautiful. Set pieces.
Mainly on the 4th of July or for
Yeah,
other occasions too?
Mostly that.
They used to have them out certain parts.
Yeah, but they also did them
That was
out
for
at the
the powwow.
university.
Yeah, Mississippi right in the.
We had them at different places, but I remember the ones
Because
at the
they-
university.
They were at Greenland for a while.
Well, Mr. Hitt also made perfume, but I don't know whether many people know that. He made his own perfume.
That was mentioned by someone in this class, yes.
I think the last fireworks display that it put on was 1974 for
Was it that late?
I was surprised to see it.
Well, they did a wonderful job with that. And I say they really did everything to make them safe, which the other companies didn't really.
You mentioned playing baseball. Were you also a spectator? Did you like to go to baseball games?
Did you go to the old ballpark? Rainier and McClellan?
Well, no, I went down to Columbia Field.
I mean to watch the games.
Oh, I did some.
How about the movies?
Oh,
The Hillman show?
the Columbia Theater. Every Friday night they had a serial there. I was there bright and early every week. It was wonderful.
A cereal?
In fact, they also had some vaudeville shows there. And a friend of mine who was a tall, lanky girl, and I was so little, and we were quite a pair. And we would go down and watch those acrobats and things, and then we'd come home and do them. And I was the one that got thrown around, of course. But that was interesting, and I knew some of the people that were Julia Raw. I remember was in those plays and in the vaudeville. It was really fun. They had that off, and then there was the American Theater up in Hillman too. But the one in Columbia was the one that had the stage part, and went to that every week. Every Friday night they had these serials.
Were these traveling shows or local people?
Local people.
And the serials were, so it would be a
Continuation.
movie that would continue the next time?
Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers were the two that I watched on Saturdays.
Was this a community event, something that everyone came to then?
Yes. It was pretty well attended. One thing I remember about that theater down there, this is kind of silly, but I'd go in there and I'd see these shows, and you know how they scan in movies, or used to a lot anyway in there. And when it was over and I would get up to go, I was so confused because I didn't know which way I was facing. And I thought, because they kept taking us round and round and round, and I wondered where I wound up. And as I say, it's a silly thing, but it's just one of those things I experienced as a young person.
Well, that was the arrangement of the theater was strange. You walked in from Rainier Avenue and you went straight back for a while. Then you angled off to the left. Then you went to the right. And the theater was going north and south with the screen to the south.
Yes, it was.
And so it was kind of confusing. But that was set back probably 75 feet from the street. It's still there. That theater's still there.
Is it?
Columbia
I
Theater.
wondered about that.
You know the reason that Columbia Theater was built, north and south, was they had to be 500 feet from the Columbia School. So that's why they built it that way, to keep the law recording And the housing and entertainment to be 500 feet.
Well, but that wasn't near the Columbia School.
Yeah, 2 blocks.
It had to be 500 feet, and they used the bricks from the old Boston building on top. But it's here, and Hirsch Summers explains about that they had to build the auditorium what it was because they had to get it 500 feet from the school. And then they built a long entrance from Rainier Avenue.
Do you remember when the police station was there on the corner
Yeah.
there on Rainier Valley? I thought that was too bad when they discontinued that because I thought they needed it.
I remember it was quite controversial when they moved out of there. But
If there was a need for it.
they went ahead and did it. Now they're talking about opening up another storefront police precinct there, just for a place where people can stop in.
They're really.
They've been doing that at communities around.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
So ideas come around. Well, thank you very much.
You were talking about the first radio station